Capcom, why is it that every time you do something good, you find a way to piss everybody the fuck off? Oddly enough, I'm not a huge fan of Resident Evil. I know nowadays that's not saying much, but I've never really been a huge fan. I like the old games, and they're for the most part superior to the new ones, but in the end, only one game can truly stand out as one of the greatest games of all time. And based on the video title, you should know what that is by now. Resident Evil 4 is as close to perfection as you can get. The gameplay is fluid and incredibly satisfying, the storyline is unique despite being different from previous games, and the graphics, well, for those of you who only have the newest remastered version, this originated on the GameCube. The fucking GameCube. Just think about that. And despite what may have come after it, this can still very easily qualify as a horror game. If you don't believe me, just look at the regenerators. I mean, look at these things. Nemesis has nothing on them. It may have gone through a drastic change in style, not to mention development hell, but if there was ever a risk that paid off, Resi 4 is the prime example. But fuck all that, man, Capcom only cares about money! And with the game already remastered on multiple systems, they need a new way to extort money out of their beloved games. So it's once again remake time. Yes, they're actually doing this. Resident Evil 4 is getting a remake, it's official now. And unlike the movie industry, video game remakes aren't quite as frowned upon. That's because, let's face it, even if you don't like modern gaming, the capabilities have no doubt increased. And that's why, for this franchise, remaking the games actually made sense. They're definitely not bad, but they are quite limited by their systems. I know some people might like tank controls, but I'm not one of them. The thing is though, Resident Evil 4 doesn't fall into that category. Not even remotely. And the idea of remaking it is about as insulting as you can get. The only solitary flaw that I can find with this game is that it's maybe too easy. By that I mean the game only has one difficulty beyond normal. And for some reason you can buy a map that tells you where all the collectibles are, and that wouldn't be that big of a deal, but you can then sell them to easily buy every upgrade in the game, thus making the final area a bit too easy. And there is that other thing that lowers the game's difficulty if you die too much, creating the illusion of overcoming challenge. And I really hate that. Did you really think we wouldn't eventually notice this? So if Capcom really gave a shit, and since they're so intent on remaking it, they could do this. Remake the game from the ground up and try not to fuck up anything. Take out the difficulty feature you know no one likes, and like most remakes, maybe add a new difficulty. But, and I know this is a big shocker, they don't give a shit. That's why, when Oculus made their VR version of the game, and cut out dialogue because it was offensive, Capcom approved that, because you can't have men flirting with women. Ridiculous.
Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur.
And if you don't believe me and think the whole thing is just fine and dandy, let's take a look at Capcom's other remakes that actually made sense to remake. Not the first remake, that one is in fact amazing. It did stick with the basic control scheme opposed to changing to the third-person view, like the newer games. But yeah, that remake was great. Let's look at the newer ones. The Resident Evil 2 remake, which took a long fucking time to come out, was at first everything I could have wanted. I started out with the Leon A campaign, I know the game doesn't call it that, but whatever. Thought the whole thing was pretty satisfying, and couldn't wait to start the Clara B campaign. As you would after playing something so well done. I mean, how could you fuck it up? Well, they found a way. You see, the original Resident Evil 2 was unique as it came with 2 discs. The reason for this is so you can pick the one character for the A game on one disc and the other for the B game. And the stuff you do and decisions you make would affect both games. Granted, the decisions boil down to which weapons you pick up, but the point is the games take place together. They connect. It was pretty impressive for that time. You would think the remake would capitalize on this, especially considering the new systems, but no, they said fuck it and discarded the whole thing. By that, I mean, despite still letting you play as both characters in all 4 scenarios, it doesn't matter because they're all almost exactly the same. I mean, how could you do this? How could you take what is probably the most iconic story in the Resident Evil canon and fuck it up? I mean, how could you have the gall to do this? It's funny too because some things are the same. Leon can only encounter Ada, Claire can only encounter Sherry, only Leon can get the shotgun while Claire gets a grenade launcher, and the same can be said for the boss battles being Tyrant and Birkin 4. The other bosses are fought the exact same way at the exact same time, regardless of who you're playing as or what game it is. The original wasn't like this. But if you're still not convinced that these scenarios can't go together, well, you're not that smart. But a blatant example of this would be the fact that Tyrant, a boss you can only fight at the end of the game with Leon, is instead killed by Birkin in the Claire game. So yeah, it pure and simply does not connect. But despite this stupid bullshit, the very final boss, along with the ending, can only be seen after completing the second game. So why the fuck would you make it like that knowing it doesn't fit together? Especially because the original didn't do that. You have to complete the second game to fight the boss, but you'd still get the ending. It didn't really make any sense, but it's better than this shit. I know a lot of people don't care about this, but I personally do because it fucks up the storyline. And it didn't have to happen. I'm sure most fans would have been okay waiting an extra year to have the game released properly, the way it should have been. But I guess then they couldn't have released the 3rd remake the very next year, and I don't know what's worse. Originally, I thought the 3rd game couldn't fail because it only has 1 campaign, so you can't mess it up. But they found a way. Like the 2nd remake, patience was limited, so to rectify this, they just cut a bunch of content out of the game. The perk? Gone. Clock Tower? Gone. Gravedigger, also known as the only boss in the game that isn't Nemesis, gone. Various enemies like dogs and brain suckers are limited to very brief appearances, and the whole thing just feels undone. The 2nd remake, if it wasn't a remake, you could maybe buy that was the intention, but with this, it just doesn't feel right. Also, not a huge fan of Nemesis in this game. Everything that made him unique and creepy in the original is lost here, as he really only stalks you in the early sections. Granted, that could have been a decision opposed to rushed development, but it's not a good one. Fun fact though about constructive decision making, did you know these games were originally going to be released as a set? You know, together, mainly because the 3rd game is about DLC length, but I guess for some unknown reason, Capcom thought it best to not do that. They preferred the idea of getting the games done as fast as they could and releasing them separately. For them, that was a better direction to go in. From a constructive standpoint, obviously. And it seems more than apparent that the Resi 4 remake is being made with the same mentality. You could have remade something else that kinda needs it more, like Code Veronica, but Resident Evil 4 is the juggernaut of the franchise that is only ever outranked by a different remake from the franchise. So it makes the most sense, from a money-based standpoint. And I know a lot of people really hate the idea of judging games before they come out, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm simply stating that the previous remakes have not been as good as they could have been, for really stupid obvious reasons. And I have to bet on the fact that a remake of a game that is almost perfect to begin with is gonna have similar things wrong with it. Personally, I prefer Resi 7 and 8 to both the previous remakes, but that's just me. I know they'll probably fuck up the next main entry too, but I'd rather that than a blatant money-grabbing attempt by trying to redo one of the greatest games of all time. But anyway, I'm the Game Analyst, and don't forget, if you really want a positive view on this, then just look up IGN. They love these things. What? You're actually here? That's fucking amazing. I guess you may as well check out the main channel, in which I discuss movies, TV series, and the offensive topics that lie within. If that interests you, then press the link in the description. It's right there.